this doctrine of the void is really the basis of the whole Mahayana movement in Buddhism. It's marvelous. The void, of course, is in Buddhist imagery symbolized by a mirror, because a mirror has no color and yet reflects all colors. When this man I talked to you of, Huineng, said that you shouldn't just try to cultivate a blank mind, what he said was this: the void, shunyata, is like space. Now, space contains everything: the mountains, the oceans, the stars, the good people and the bad people, the plants, the animals, everything. Now, the mind in us, the true mind, is like that. You will find that when Buddhists use the word mind, they have several words for mind, but I'm not going into the technicality. They mean space. See, space is your mind. It's very difficult for us to see that because we think we're in space and look out at it. There are various kinds of space. There's visual space, distance. There is audible space, silence. There is temporal space, as we say, between times. There is musical space, so-called distance between intervals, or the intervals between tones, rather. Quite a different kind of space. Temporal or visual space. There's tangible space. But all these spaces, you see, are the mind. They're the dimensions of consciousness. And so, this great space, which every one of us apprehends from a slightly different point of view, in which the universe moves, this is the mind. So it's represented by a mirror, because although the mirror has no color, it is for that reason able to receive all the different colors. Meister Eckhart said, in order to see color, my eye has to be free from color. So in the same way, in order not only to see, but also to hear, to think, to feel, you have to have an empty head. And the reason why you are not aware of your brain cells, unless you're only aware of your brain cells if you get a tumor or something in the brain, when it gets sick. But in the ordinary way, you're totally unconscious of your brain cells. They're void. And for that reason, you see everything else. So that's the central principle of the Mahayana. And it works in such a way, you see, that it releases people from the notion that Buddhism is clinging to the void. This was very important when Buddhism went into China. The Chinese really dug this, because Chinese are a very practical people. And when they found these Hindu Buddhist monks trying to empty their minds and to sit perfectly still and not to engage in any family activities, they were celibates, Chinese thought they were crazy. Why do that? And so the Chinese reformed Buddhism. And they allowed Buddhist priests to marry. And in fact, what they especially enjoyed was a sutra that came from India, in which a layman was a wealthy merchant called Vimalakirti, out-argued all the other disciples of Buddha. And of course, you know, if in these are these dialectic arguments that are very, very intense things. If you win the argument, everybody else has to be your disciple. So Vimalakirti the layman won the debate, even with Manjusri, who is the bodhisattva of supreme wisdom. They all had to see a contest to define the void. And all of them gave their definitions. Finally, Manjusri gave his. And Vimalakirti was asked then for his definition. And he said nothing. And so he won the whole argument. Thunderous silence. Change is emphasized. First, to unsettle people who think that they can achieve permanence by hanging on to life. And it seems that the preacher is wagging his finger at them and saying, you know, like the Scotch preacher one day saying to Sunday congregation, preaching on the text, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. And what about the rich food you put into your mouth? It is vanity. And the fine raiment you put on your backs, it is vanity. And all your playing around, going to golf instead of coming to the church every Sabbath, it is vanity. And you'll be spending all your lives devoted to vanity, and the last day will come, the day of your death, and because you've devoted your life to vanity, you'll go down to the burning, fiery brimstone pits of hell. And there you look up and say unto the Lord, oh Lord, I oh Lord, I wouldn't have devoted my life to vanity if I'd known. Oh Lord. And the Lord, he'll look down and he'll say unto you out of his infinite mercy, well, you know it now. So all the preachers together, don't cling to this thing. So then, as a result of that, and now I'm going to speak in strictly Buddhist terms, the follower of the way of Buddha seeks deliverance from attachment to the world of change. He seeks nirvana, the state beyond change, which the Buddha called the unborn, the unoriginated, the uncreated, and the unformed. But then you see, what he finds out is that in seeking a state beyond change, seeking nirvana as something away from samsara, which is the name for the wheel, he is still seeking something permanent. And so there are, as Buddhism went on, they thought about this a great deal. And this very point was the point of division between the two great schools of Buddhism, which in the south were Theravada, the doctrine of the Thera, the elders, sometimes known disrespectfully as the Hinayana. Yana means a vehicle, a conveyance, a diligence, or a ferry boat. This is a yana. And I live on a ferry boat because that's my job. Then there is the other school of Buddhism called the Mahayana. Maha means great, hina, little. The great vehicle and the little vehicle. Now, what is this? The Mahayanists say, your little vehicle just gets a few people who are very, very tough ascetics and takes them across the other shore to nirvana. But the great vehicle shows people that nirvana is not different from ordinary life. So that when you have reached nirvana, if you think, now I have attained it, now I have succeeded, now I have caught the secret of the universe, and I am at peace, you have only a false peace. You have become a stone Buddha. You have a new illusion of the changeless. So it is said that such a person is a pratyeka Buddha. That means private Buddha. I've got it all for myself. And in contrast with this kind of pratyeka Buddha who gains nirvana and stays there, the Mahayanists use the word bodhisattva. Sattva means essential principle, bodhi, awakening. A person whose essential being is awakened. The word used to mean junior Buddha, someone on the way to becoming a Buddha. But in the course of time, it came to mean someone who had attained Buddhahood, who had reached nirvana, but who returns into everyday life to deliver all other beings. This is the popular idea of a bodhisattva, a savior. And so in the popular Buddhism of Tibet and China and Japan, people worship the bodhisattvas, the great bodhisattvas, as saviors. Say the hermaphroditic Kuan Yin. People love Kuan Yin because she, he could be a Buddha, but has come back into the world to save all beings. The Japanese call he, Kannon. And they have in Kyoto an image of Kannon with 1,000 arms, radiating like a great aureole all round this great golden figure. And these 1,000 arms are 1,000 different ways of rescuing beings from ignorance. Kannon is a funny thing. I remember one night when I suddenly realized that Kannon was incarnate in the whole city of Kyoto. That this whole city was Kannon. That the police department, the taxi drivers, the fire department, the mayor and corporation, the shopkeepers, insofar as this whole city was a collaborative effort to sustain human life. However bungling, however inefficient, however corrupt, it was still a manifestation of Kannon, with its 1,000 arms, all working independently, and yet one. So they revere those bodhisattvas as the saviors who've come back into the world to deliver all beings. But there is a more esoteric interpretation of this. The bodhisattva returns into the world. That means he has discovered that you don't have to go anywhere to find nirvana. Nirvana is where you are. And everything is changed, nothing can be held on to. to the degree that you go with a stream, you see, you are still. You're flowing with it. But to the degree you resist the stream, then you notice that the current is rushing past you and fighting with you. So swim with it. Go with it. And you're there. You're at rest. And this is, of course, particularly true when it comes to those moments when life really seems to be going to take us away. And the stream of change is going to swallow us completely. The moment of death. And we think, oh, this is it. This is the end. And so at death we withdraw. Say, no, not that. Not yet, please. But actually, the whole problem is that there really is no other problem for human beings than to go over that waterfall when it comes. Just as you go over any other waterfall. Just as you go on from day to day. Just as you go to sleep at night. Be absolutely willing to die. Now, I'm not preaching. I'm not saying you ought to be willing to die and that you should muscle up your courage and somehow put on a good front when the terrible thing comes. That's not the idea at all. The point is that you can only die well if you understand this system of waves. If you understand that your disappearance as the form in which you think you are you, your disappearance as this particular organism, is simply seasonal, that you are just as much the dark space beyond death as you are the light interval called life. These are just two sides of you. Because you is the total wave. See, you can't have half a wave. Nobody ever saw waves which just had crests, no troughs. So you can't have half a human being who is born but doesn't die. Half a thing. That would be only half a thing. But the propagation of vibrations, and life is vibration, it simply goes on and on, but its cycles are long cycles and short cycles. Space, you see, is not just nothing. If I could magnify my hand to an enormous degree so that you could see all the molecules in it, I don't know how far apart they would be, but it seems to me they would be something like tennis balls in a very, very large space. And you'd look, when I move my hand like this, and say, for God's sake, look at all those tennis balls. They're all going together. Crazy. And there are no strings tying them together. Isn't that queer? No, but there's space going with it. Space is a function of, or it's an inseparable aspect of, whatever solids are in the space. That is the clue, probably, to what we mean by gravity. We don't know. So in the same way, when those marvelous sandpipers come around here, the little ones, while they're in the air flying, they have one mind. They move all together. When they alight on the mud, they become individuals and they go pecking around for worms or something. But one click of the fingers and all those things are going zip into the air. They don't seem to have a leader because they don't follow when they turn. They all turn together. and go off in another direction. Amazing. But they're like the molecules in my hand. So then, you see, here's the principle. When you don't resist change, I mean over-resist. I don't mean being flabby. When you don't resist change, you see that the changing world, which disappears like smoke, is no different from the nirvana world. Nirvana, as I said, means breathe out. Let go of the breath. So in the same way, don't resist change. It's all the same principle. So the bodhisattva saves all beings, not by preaching sermons to and that is salvation. Memento mori, be mindful of death. Gurdjieff says in one of his books that the most important thing for anyone to realize is that you and every person you see will soon be dead. I love the story of a conversation at an English country house at a dinner party, where the hostess started up the question of death and asked the various guests what they thought was going to happen to them when they died. And some thought about reincarnation, and others thought about various kinds of different planes of being, and others thought they were going to be annihilated. But none of the guests had answered except Sir Roderick, who was a kind of a military type, but a very devout pillar of the Church of England. He was the church warden, chief of the vestry in the local country parish. And the lady said, "Sir Roderick, you haven't said a word. What do you think is going to happen to you when you die?" "Oh," he said, "I am perfectly certain that I shall go to heaven and enjoy everlasting bliss, but I wish you wouldn't indulge in such a depressing conversation." That's true, isn't it? Death in the Western world is a real problem. We hush it up. We pretend it hasn't happened. Our morticians, who are very smart commercial operators, know exactly what's expected of them. And they make death just awful by pretending it doesn't happen. See what happens. You go to a hospital and you're at the end. You've got terminal cancer. And all your friends come around and they wear false smiles and they say, "Cheer up, you'll be all right. In a few days from now, you'll be back home and we'll..." The doctors have their bedside man. You see, a doctor is absolutely helpless with a terminal case because a doctor is, by social definition, a healer. And he's not allowed to help you die. He's out of role. Even though, I mean, he may sneak behind the rules and do it, but he's... But that they just don't know how to be frank, like lots of people when they meet a drunk. They don't know what to do with a drunk. Because he's not behaving right. So when you're dying, you're not behaving right. You're supposed to live. See, so we don't know what to do with a dying person. we don't get around that person and say, listen, man, listen, I've got the news for you. You're going to die. And this is going to be great. Look, no more responsibilities. Don't have to pay those bills. He said, no, birth doesn't hurt, it's natural. All we've got to do is to talk these women into the idea that it doesn't hurt, that all these so-called pains are just tensions, and that birth is great. It's not a disease. It's not really something you ought to go to hospital for, because you associate hospitals with diseases and sickness. Birth isn't sickness. All right, now let's do some new thinking. What about death? Is death sickness? Or is it a healthy, natural event like being born? Of course it is. So, I mean, a little change in social attitude about this will fortify everybody else. I mean, if I'm alone and all my relatives are going, kind of pretending to me, it's going to be hard for me. I've got to challenge the whole bunch of them and get my dander up and say, listen, damn you, I don't want all this thing around here. You've got to take a different attitude about my death. Well, that's hard. But if everybody helps me, and we do, we're all one body, if they all come around and say, congratulations, you're going to die.
I happen to be a lover of archery, but I don't like archery for killing things. I like it as a sport. But what I like most of all is to set an arrow free, like it were a bird. You know, when it gets far up in the sky, whee! You watch it, and it suddenly turns and drops. What is it that fascinates us about that? Because it's not useful. It doesn't really achieve anything that we would call purposive work. It simply is what we call play. But in our culture, we make an extremely rigid division between work and play. You are supposed to work in order to earn enough money to give you sufficient leisure time for something entirely different called having fun or play. Imagine, too, if you were a bus driver. A bus driver is ordinarily considered an absolutely harassed person. He's got to watch out for all the laws, all the competing traffic, the cops, people coming on board giving their fares, and he has to give them change. And if he has it in his head that this is work, it will be hell. But let's suppose he has a different thing in his head. Supposing he has the idea that moving this enormous conveyance through complicated traffic is a very, very subtle game. And he has the same feeling about it that you might have if you were playing the guitar or dancing. And so he goes through that traffic, avoiding this and avoiding that, and taking a fare like this, and he makes some music of the whole thing. Well, he's not going to be tired out at the end of the day. He's going to be full of energy when he gets through his job. The art of washing dishes is that you only have to wash one at a time. If you're doing it day after day, you have in your mind's eye an enormous stack of filthy dishes which you have washed up in years past, and an enormous stack of filthy dishes which you will wash up in years future. But if you bring in your mind to the state of reality, which is, as I've pointed out to you, only now, this is where we are. There is only now. You only have to wash one dish. It's the only dish you'll ever have to wash, this one. You ignore all the rest, because in reality, there is no past and there is no future. There is just now. So you wash this one. And instead of thinking, have I got it really clean, as my mother taught me with an angry voice, that I had to get every little scrap out of it, you know, and she got angry at me. Instead, you turn the cleaning movement into a dance. Like this. And you dig that. And you swing that plate around. And you let the rinsing water go over it. And you put it out in the rack. Crazy. See? Take the next one. You get this rhythm. See? And you're not under compulsion all the time. You know, when I was a little boy and went to school in England, I had to learn the piano. They called it playing the piano. But actually, they said you must play. We had in England compulsory games. They used to post notices on the bulletin board in the school where I went. It said, this afternoon everyone will go for a run. And if you didn't go for a run, and it was found out that you hadn't, you were flogged. So everybody hated going for a run, because they were under compulsion to play. Everybody must play. It's like the whole game of life we're all involved in. It's only a game. Everybody has got to belong. So we went running. I remember one day I was out on a run, and I was trying to enjoy myself because I was running on the balls of my feet, dancing along. And a fellow came up behind me who was running on his heels. He was jogging. And he was going thump, 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 thump. And I said to him, what's the matter with you? You're running on your heels. And you're jarring your whole body all the way through. Okay, but he stuck to it, and he became the champion long-distance runner in the school. But he didn't enjoy it. It didn't work. And all he enjoyed was the suffering that he endured that made him feel that he had really contributed to the human race because he suffered so much. He identified his existence and his worth with his suffering. Now, really great runners dance when they run. They don't necessarily follow a straight course. They may weave. And in the same way, if you happen to witness in the year 1970 the World Cup Championship in soccer, you would have seen that the winning team from Brazil played soccer in the most extraordinary way. They played it like basketball. They played it dancing. The way we learned soccer in school when I was a boy was very, very formal and audible, and we didn't really enjoy it. But these fellows were bouncing balls off their shoulders, off every muscle, and they had astonishing teamwork. But at the same time, were dancing the game, and the sports writer in the London Times said that they danced their way to victory. So the point is, therefore, that you can do everything you have to do in this spirit. Don't make a distinction between work and play. Regard everything that you're doing as play, and don't imagine for 1 minute that you've got to be serious about it. Let's take, for example, the rest of the world, other than ourselves. Think for a moment, what are vegetables doing? Let's, for example, consider this. What's it all about? I mean, it serves us, human beings, by being decorative. But what is it from its own point of view? See, because here is the stalk, and all these leaves come out, ching, 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 all that stuff, and whoops, it goes into this. And then it goes into flowers in the end, you see, and they go all around. But I look at the thing, and it's like a symphony. It's just like Bach doing a fugue, with all the different movements going. That's what it's about. Well, you say, it's using up air, it's using up energy, it's really not doing anything except being ornamental. And yet here's the whole vegetable world. Not only cactus plants like this, but all trees, roses, tulips, and edible vegetables, cabbages, celery, lettuce. They're all doing this dance. And what is it all about? Why do we do it? Well, we say, one must live. It's necessary to survive. You know, you really must go on. It's your duty. It's your duty to your children. But you see, the thing I feel is if you bring up your children that way and tell them that they ought to be grateful to you because you're doing your duty to them, they will learn to bring up their children in the same way, and everybody will be depressed. There really is no necessity to go on living. We think, it's part of our Western philosophy, that we think we have a drive to survive, that we must go on living. Because some big daddy said to us, you got to go on living, see? And you better make it, or else. Well, I've already explained to you on this show that there is the fear of death is completely absurd. Because if you're dead, you've got nothing to worry about. So you'll be all right. So in the same way, you must not, I don't want to use that word, must. Because I'm not trying to talk to you as an authority, I'm trying to talk to you as somebody who's opening your mind up, a helper, not a father figure. This thing here, this plant, I'm quite sure it doesn't say to itself, you ought to go on living. You've got an instinct to survive, which is something other than yourself and which you have to obey. See, I don't think of my own instincts as drives, which is the proper psychological term for them nowadays. I think of my instincts as myself. I don't say, excuse me, but I have an unfortunate desire to reproduce myself, and therefore I'm sexy, and would you please accommodate me? I don't say, excuse me, but I have to eat, and really it's absolutely necessary that I eat. I say, on the contrary, hooray! I am this desire to make love, and I am this desire to eat. It's not something else that pushes me around, it's me. Well, all right, but it doesn't have to go on. I don't feel so compelled that if it were to stop, well, if it were to stop, if I were to be killed, that would be another scene. That would be a different form of the dance. If I'm in pain, people say, don't scream, don't cry, because screaming or crying is a perfectly natural reaction to pain. when a baby is first born, they cut the umbilical cord and somebody smacks it on the bottom. And the baby, yeah! See? That's the first thing in the world. There is in Zen Buddhism a koan, which says that when the Buddha was born, he suddenly stood up and announced, above the heavens and below the heavens, I alone am the world-honored one. Well, everybody would say that was an extremely proud thing to say. So they give this to students of Buddhism as a problem. How could it be that the Buddha, as a little baby, was so proud as to make this pompous statement when he was born? And if you understand the problem correctly, you answer, because that is the perfectly natural response to the painful event of being born into this world. But thereafter, we always say, baby, don't you cry. Shut up. We don't like to hear babies cry. Shut up. And therefore, we stamp out in human beings their natural release from the problem of pain. If you're in pain, cry. And if you can't do that, then pain is your problem. But if you can cry, and if you can let go in that way, pain is no problem. And if you get the shudders at death, the idea of death, the idea of not being here anymore, just get those shudders and dig them. Because the shuddering, isn't it curious? We sometimes say, you remember that song that said, I am not shivering cause I'm cold. I am not shivering cause I'm cold. I am not shivering cause I'm cold. I am just shivering with delight. You know, we get the shivers of delight. So all these emotions that we have, the emotions of uptightness, dread, shivers, horrors, can be interpreted in other ways. But we interpret them in a negative way so long as we are under the sense that you absolutely must go on living. Now you see, living, like this plant, is something spontaneous. In Chinese, the word for nature is zhiran, which means that which happens of itself, not under any control of an outside boss. And they feel that all the world is happening so of itself. It's spontaneous. And so you stop this spontaneous flowering of nature cold if you tell it you must do it. It's like saying to someone, you must love me. Well, it's ridiculous. If I were to ask my wife, darling, do you really love me? And she says, I'm trying my best to do so. That's not the answer I want. I want her to say, I can't help loving you. I love you so much I could eat you. And that's what the plant feels in growing. It doesn't feel that it must grow. It's not under orders. It's not a military chain of command. It does this spontaneously. So that when you try to command a spontaneous process, you stop it. It's like saying to someone, now, be unself-conscious. You know, there's a belief in India that if you think of a monkey while you're taking medicine, the medicine won't work. So therefore, when you take your vitamins or next pills, try not to think of a monkey. See? And that will completely tie up the spontaneous process, and it won't work. So all the things that we say to our children, like, well, you must have a bowel movement after breakfast. Try, darling, to go to sleep. Stop pouting. Take that look off your face. Oh, you're blushing. Make you feel guilty about blushing. See? All those things are attempts to say this one thing. Darling, little child, you are required to do what will be acceptable only if you do it voluntarily. And everybody on this account is completely mixed up, because we are trying to force genuine behavior. We all admire artists when we say they're unself-conscious. They seem so natural. They seem to dance or paint or talk or play the piano so effortlessly. Of course, a lot of work has gone into it. But if you are a great artist, your so-called periods of practice, when you sit for hours and study your technique on the piano, you will not do that effectively unless it is a pleasure for you. You have to come to the point where going over it again and again is a dance. One of my friends is a great Hindu musician who has the most extraordinary technique in playing an instrument called the sarod. It's like an extremely sophisticated Hindu guitar. His name is Ali Akbar Khan, and he's generally acknowledged to be the leading master of Northern Indian music. He told me once that the comprehension of music is in understanding one note. The meaning of that is he can sit for hours and hours working on this, but there really is only one note at a time. And he gets into that note and listens. He really listens. Gets into the sound. And it simply doesn't matter that it takes a long time, that he have to do this for many hours, because he's completely absorbed in listening to the sound he is now making. He's going with that vibration, as when you might chant, they do in yoga. You can keep that up for hours. What is it? See, this is the real secret of life. To be completely engaged with what you're doing in the here and now. And instead of calling it work, realize that this is play. In Hindu philosophy, the whole creation is regarded as the Vishnu Leela. That means the play of Vishnu. Leela means dance or play, and from it we get our word lilt. They also, in Hindu philosophy, call the world an illusion. And in Latin, the root of the word illusion is ludere, to play. Because all this going on, the swinging of the ball, the pattern in which the flower goes, is just to swing. And if you take it seriously and say, are you doing anything useful? Useful for what? Useful to go on. But if you take that attitude to going on becomes a drag. Survival becomes a sweat, and it's not worth it. And if you teach your children, and they'll imitate you, they'll treat survival as a sweat that they have to undergo, they have to keep going on, they'll teach their children to do it, and the whole continuation of the human race will be a drag, which is in fact what it's become because of this attitude, and this is the reason why we've invented the atomic bomb and are preparing to commit suicide. Because we think we must have it. And to the degree that we think we must have it, we hate it. And are going to bring it to an end. And stop it. So I I was about to say seriously, but I'm going to change my words and say sincerely. To suggest. You know, I'm not, in talking to you, I'm not preaching. I'm not actually serious. Because I'm really with this rather than any kind of deep philosophy and so on. G.K. Chesterton once said that the angels fly because they take themselves lightly. How much more so then he, she, who is Lord of the angels.
Remember my silhouette.
The whole world. Is 3 for a penny, 3 for a pound, 'tis love that makes the world go round. So I suggest to you sincerely to be completely engaged with what you're doing in the here and now.